I never meant to walk away without saying goodbye, but sometimes words can't explain what the heart feels. The silence I left behind speaks louder than any explanation I could give. Leaving without closure was never my intention, but it was the only way I knew to protect myself. In the end, it's not about the reasons I left, but about the regret that lingers when the truth remains unsaid. I wish I could have found the courage to explain, but sometimes fear and doubt overshadow the desire for closure. The hardest part of leaving was not walking away, but knowing I left you with unanswered questions. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I didn't know how to explain the chaos inside me. Sometimes you walk away from something because it's too overwhelming to explain, but that doesn't mean you don't miss it. I left, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't find the right words to say. Not every goodbye is easy, and sometimes the hardest part is not leaving, but not knowing how to explain why. There are moments in life when leaving feels like the only option, even if it's without closure. I know I hurt you by leaving without an explanation, and for that, I'm truly sorry. The truth is, leaving without explaining was easier in that moment, but it's harder to carry now. I never wanted to leave you with questions, but sometimes silence feels like the only way to process the storm inside. Leaving without words was my way of escaping, but I now realize it left me with a heart full of regret. I walked away without looking back, but it's your face that haunts me in the quiet moments. Sometimes it's not about what you say, but what remain unsaid that holds the most weight. I wish I could have explained myself, but sometimes words can never fully capture the emotions that guide our decisions. The truth is, I was afraid of the reaction, so I left without explaining, but I never wanted to hurt you. I thought leaving would be easier than explaining, but now I see how much harder it is to live with the silence. Leaving you without words was the hardest decision I've ever made, but it was the only way I knew how to cope. It wasn't that I didn't care, but rather that I didn't know how to explain the overwhelming emotions I was feeling. The absence of an explanation doesn't mean there wasn't a reason, but it was one too complex to put into words. Sometimes the heart makes decisions that the mind cannot explain, and I wish I had found a way to make you understand. I wanted to explain everything, but I feared my explanation would only complicate things even more. Leaving without an explanation was my way of protecting myself, but I see now it only caused you pain. I left because I couldn't figure out how to make you understand, not because I didn't care. In moments of confusion, silence feels safer than speaking words that can't capture the depth of what we feel. I'm sorry for leaving without explaining, but sometimes the heart has its reasons that the mind can't understand. I never meant to leave you hanging, but sometimes the best intentions lead to the deepest regrets. The hardest part of leaving is not saying goodbye, but leaving someone without the answers they deserve. I left because I needed space to heal, but that doesn't mean I wasn't thinking of you every step of the way. The weight of leaving without an explanation is something I carry every day. Sometimes, in trying to protect the ones we love, we end up hurting them by leaving without an explanation. I thought that walking away without saying a word would be easier, but the silence has been deafening. I didn't leave because I didn't care. I left because I didn't know how to explain what was happening to me. Leaving was my way of protecting myself from the unknown, but I see now that it only created more questions. In the silence of my departure, there's a longing for closure that I never got the chance to give you. I didn't leave to hurt you, but I now realize that leaving without an explanation was a hurt I never intended. Leaving without closure is a form of self-protection, but it's also a form of self-doubt. I wish I could have told you the reasons I left, but in that moment, I couldn't find the strength to explain. Not explaining my departure was a mistake, but sometimes we make choices that we later wish we could undo. Leaving without words doesn't mean I didn't care. It means I didn't know how to say what was in my heart. It wasn't about running away. It was about running toward understanding, even if it meant leaving without an explanation. I left because I was lost in my own emotions, but I now realize that it left you lost too. The hardest part of leaving was not saying goodbye, but knowing I left without offering any peace. I didn't want to leave without explaining, but the fear of being misunderstood made silence seem easier.